Stop talking about comic books or I'll kill you. I don't care if the Hulk could defeat the man.
Welcome to the first inaugural issue of the Fortress of Popitude, a new podcast talking about your favorite comics news and all things pop culture. I'm your host, Bullseye Bob, and this gentleman sitting next to me is
Super Dave.
Come on now.
Come on. Gonna be good.
How you doing today, Super Dave?
I am doing fantastic.
Fantastic. You know, I'll take that. Yeah, a little spangly spandex sometimes goes a long way to be fantastic.
Hey,
That's for sure.
the 1980s wrestlers had it big, you know, until they said no speedos.
That's for sure. That's
Okay.
for sure. So awesome stuff. So yes, this is the Fortress of Popitude. It is a new podcast dealing with pop culture and comics news. And some of you may be wondering why another podcast on comics. And you know what we have to say to that? Why not? What do you think, Super Dave?
I think comic books is a culturally accepted thing. You can look at, professional wrestlers,
Mm-hmm.
you look professional football players, basketball players, movie actors, it is definitely something that comic books is definitely in pop culture.
Absolutely.
And it's, come on, who wouldn't like just to get away and read a comic book, one of the, crisp pages, you open it up on a Saturday rainy morning, or, as we're doing Thanksgiving next tomorrow.
That's right.
Thanksgiving, kicking back in the chair, putting the feet up, after you've eaten your turkey and you're getting your tiredness on, just relax and read a book. Come on now, that sounds like heaven to me.
Sounds like heaven to me too. So definitely, and something that you just touched on is the fact that culturally it's touched so many people, this particular medium. And I hate to start our brand new podcast on a sad note, but this last week we did have the passing of a comic books legend. I mean, if there was a Mount Rushmore of comic book legends, his face would be there. And of course, I'm talking about the great Stan Lee.
Yes, Excelsior,
Marvelites. So, one of the things I'd like to do is, I think, Dave, you said that we have a video that is a tribute to him.
It is a video. We're actually going to play it at the end.
At the end,
easier
okay.
for editing.
No, not a problem. That's perfect. But just really quick, I'd like to just ask you a question. I mean, Stan the Man was great. I mean, he's an icon, of course. Most people know him from all of the cameos inside of the movies. But of course, us as, avid comic book fans know that it goes much deeper than that. He had such a legacy. Just, Dave, can you talk about how Stan Lee impacted your life?
Well, you look at, Stan, he looked at his love for his books.
Oh, yeah.
His love for his characters. Correct me right, he's the one that actually drew out Spider-Man, is that right?
He's the one that him and Steve Ditko drew him, and Stan Lee did all the writing and editing for Spider-Man. Yeah.
So you look at his fingerprints on everything.
Oh, for sure.
My greatest thing I love about Stan Lee was the fact, I know on my personal Facebook, I did a tribute of all the cameos he's in. It's going to be a very sad day to me when you're watching a Marvel movie and you don't see Stan Lee in some way, shape, or form in the movie.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it was X-Men. It doesn't matter if it was the Avengers. It wasn't even matter if it was a TV show.
Right.
He found a way to be in the movie, and the directors could not say anything about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, his fingerprints. And, look at our culture,
Mm-hmm.
There's fingerprints all around. We were talking before the podcast that the lead singer of Metallica, he said how I got my inspiration from my music was from Stan Lee's Avengers comic books.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you look at Freddie Mercury.
From Queen.
This dude wrote songs,
Mm-hmm.
For Marvel and their movies and their TV shows. You go back to the 60s and 70s, you had the Incredible Hulk,
Yep.
you had Spider-Man, you had the Thor we don't talk about. I mean, it's culturally speaking how much he's made an impact. Not in like my age group, millennials.
Mm-hmm.
I think millennial. No, maybe I'm a Gen Xer, right? Yeah.
You're the end of Gen X.
Yeah, so I'm trying to be younger, but hey, but even with that culture there, and then even up to the 70s, this dude was like in movies that weren't even affiliated with Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Talking about characters. He made a cameo. I forgot the name of the movie was, but he made a cameo. And this guy looks, you're Stan Lee.
Yep, that was Mallrats.
Mallrats. I saw that video. I mean, we think about, in our culture, people that make impacts in a positive way. In our culture, we have a lot of people make negative impacts, but he made a positive impact.
Absolutely.
And he made it continuously, decade after decade. And then, the video we're watching, he's like, he lost his wife last year.
Yeah.
So, and that was
just
really
months short of 75 years of marriage.
Yes. And that right there, that's when, if you look in pictures and videos of Stan Lee, that's when his health started to decay.
Yeah.
That's when you're talking about his signings and stuff like that. There was different things he wouldn't sign because of the energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll watch this video, but the whole song was my buddy Mike, who's a huge Superman fan, but comics was his outlet.
Yeah, yeah.
And he wrote a song called Mr. Henshaw, but it was a tribute to Stan Lee, and talking about, not so much about the cameos and not so much about his work, but he talked about his wife.
Yeah.
And
Joanie.
Because Joanie was the reason he wrote comic books.
Absolutely.
Because he was providing, before he did comic books, he was writing funnies in a newspaper.
Right.
And where do we get now? We get Stan Lee, who countless generations of people are sad that he passed away. Yeah. There's some people like this idiot that's on, what's the name of the show?
Oh, Bill Maher.
Bill Maher, who said that, that comic books are dead and they're wrong, and and disgusted, that response. And Stan Lee's team slammed him back with a disgusting response to comic books. I mean, that was right there where he just basically was, I can't say it because YouTube will bleep it, well, maybe I can say it. He's an ass.
Yeah.
And he just was an idiot. I mean, why would you even do that? Where's your sensitivity?
He had no frame of reference for what he was talking about. He obviously doesn't understand just how much the genre has impacted our culture, impacted people, and his whole argument on Stan Lee's legacy was that people who were supposedly smart going to college wrote thesis papers on either storylines or characters that Stan wrote, and because of that, they became socially or in our time relevant. And so he was slamming that and saying that the guy doesn't really have a legacy. This was stuff that when he was a kid, he read comic books, but it was kind of agreed that this was only a medium that was for kids. And that frame of reference, obviously, like I said, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and just how deep some of these stories really touched people and how culturally relevant they were. The thing about Stan Lee that I've always loved, besides the fact that his body of work from 1964 to 1972, you can't touch it. I mean, he created countless characters. He wrote many, many books. And you have writers and artists today who can't even touch the vastness of the amount of stuff he was doing at the time. We will never see an age like this again. The things that him and Kirby and Ditko did were just enormous contributions to the genre, number one. Number two, he reinvented the genre. When the Silver Age began, it started with Fantastic Four number one. Like you had mentioned, Joanie, he was about to quit comics, and his wife Joanie said, just write the story that you want to do before you leave. And that way, even if you get fired, you wrote what you want to write.
Yeah.
And bam, the Silver Age started. It got more sales than anything that was around at the time, and Marvel began. Yeah. And so you can't, refute the amount of impact just the comic books had. But the thing that got me about Stan wasn't that he just didn't write comic books. He used the comic book media to basically bring up social issues in a time when you could have gotten in a lot of trouble for bringing them up.
Yeah.
Just last year there was a tribute to Stan Lee that was down in LA, and RZA from Wu-Tang Clan, he got up and he gave this eloquent rap on, it seemed like a rap on racism and how it was wrong, and anybody who, you know, was a bigot is just, you know, socially inept. And I mean, it was just this amazing thing. And they're like, what does this have to do with Stan Lee? And at the very end of it, he said, that was Stan Lee, 1968 Stan soapbox. And man, I was impacted so hard. I had to go back and grab that Stan soapbox and see, you know, in 1968, he was writing against racism in a time when racism was one of the hot topics in our country, and people were getting hurt for it. Yeah. And he fearlessly used the medium to be able to touch people. But I think really, Dave, Super Dave, the thing that really touched me the most about Stan Lee was when I first got into comic books, you know, I didn't have a family, or at least my family had kind of moved away, and I didn't have much contact with them. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was trying to find myself, trying to, find that place of belonging. Comic books provided that for me. I'll talk about that later. But the thing that Stan did was almost every comic book, he made you feel like you're part of the club.
That's right.
He made you feel like you were in on the secret, that you were part of the club, and that there was this whole network of people out there who were excited about the same things that we were excited, that I was excited about, and I felt connected. And he made me feel connected. Plus, being a good hype man, you wanted to buy just about every comic book that was on the stands at the time. But Stan had that way of making you feel included, and I always appreciated that about him, because in a time when I didn't have very many people in my life, he gave me a place of belonging. And that's the best thing I could say about the man.
Another really great thing about Stan was that he was a veteran too.
Absolutely.
He did not just, well, I'm going to write comics, I'm going to be against the culture. No, he actually served our country. I believe it was the Vietnam War.
No, it was World War II.
World War II. Well, yeah, he's a lot older than I thought he was.
Yeah.
But he didn't feel like that.
No.
No. He served our country. He was there, and he came back, and instead of just sitting down, he contributed something about being positive.
Sure.
And it was like, you wake up in the morning. I remember sending you a screenshot, on Instagram, and I don't even know if you were awake yet, or you probably already heard about it by 15 other people.
No, when you had sent that message to me via Facebook, I was actually in my car crying. I had just heard about it, and I don't cry at celebrities dying. But Stan Lee's life had touched mine in such a huge way. Even though I never met him, I felt like I knew him. And I was in tears. I thought, what a loss, for so many people and for myself. He was just, what an amazing run. 95 years old, married for just about 75 years. And who can say that they've touched this many people, not just with movies, but with their writing. He may not have written the great American novel like he wanted to, but he made his mark, and he'll never be forgotten.
Yeah, you think about 9 decades, right? Every 10 years is a decade, right?
Every 10 years is a decade.
9 decades, and at least probably about 40 or 50 of those.
Just about 50, yeah.
50 of those decades, he's spoken to the lives of so many people.
Absolutely.
Wow.
The great Stan Lee, everybody.
Excelsior.
We definitely couldn't do this podcast without saying something about the great Stan Lee. And so thank you for all of you who are feeling the same thing that we are. We're all part of the same culture, part of the same team, and we will all always remember the great Stan Lee.
I like how you said it at Comic-Con, my very first Comic-Con with you. This is our tribe.
This is our tribe. Absolutely. Absolutely. Welcome to the tribe.
Yeah.
So, Fortress of Popitude. So, we're going to be doing this about every 2 weeks. And one of the things that you can always count on is that we will have, we'll be talking about news, talking about things relative, to pop culture and things that are Comic-Con related. I think the only thing about our show that'll be different than others is we're going to have a section every time we have another issue. Is we'll have what we call the countdown to Rose City Comic-Con.
Okay.
Now, listeners who are not from Portland, I know that won't mean much to them, but listeners who are in Portland, Oregon, this is our greatest con, and we will have exclusive news updates for the Rose City Comic-Con.
It's going to be Sweet.
It's going to be amazing.
As a friend of mine would say, legit.
Legit. I think I know who that friend is. So that's what you can expect. Of course, Super Dave and I, we love to talk about this stuff, and I know that our passion will come through. And I know that there are a lot of listeners out there who have the same passion. And so join us for this trip that we're going to take with the Fortress of Popitude, and we hope you enjoy it. So just before we go on, I would like to mention a couple of our sponsors. We have a couple of local sponsors here in the Portland area that we'd like to talk about. First is there's a restaurant downtown called the Nerd Out.
Nerd Out.
Dave, have you ever been to the Nerd Out?
We're going to go. I still haven't made it yet.
Awesome. Well, when you go, there's the owner there. His name is Mitch. He's an amazing guy. Just walk in and say hi. And same thing for our listeners. Make sure that you say hi to Mitch at the Nerd Out. It is at 3308 Southeast Belmont Street in Portland, Oregon. Of course, they do have a website. It's at thenerdoutpdx.com. And the Nerd Out has cosplay nights. They have trivia nights, game nights. They have intergalactic drinks and comic books conversation. The place is awesome. The walls are lined with comic books. Stop in and check out the Nerd Out and make sure that you say hi to Mitch. He's an amazing guy and the owner and proprietor. And then also we have Comic Adventures.
We're going to go there today, aren't we?
We're going to go there today, right after the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
This is a comic book store that is on 455 Portland Avenue in Gladstone. You can also find them on Facebook, Comics Adventure. The owner's name is Bruce. He's an amazing guy. Go in, talk to him. He is part of the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And let him know what it is that you're looking for. If you buy your comics in advance from him, you get a 10% discount. And, he's a great guy. The first time I went in there, I didn't even have a pull list yet, and he still gave me the discount. That's just the type of guy that he is. We like to support our local comics people, local shops, and Comics Adventure is definitely one of those places that you need to go.
That is correct.
So thank you very much for our sponsors. So Super Dave, we got some things to talk about in this first inaugural edition of Fortress of Popitude. We're going to talk about you and I for a second, so our listeners can get to know us. And so what I'd like to do is just ask a couple of questions. I'll ask you, and then I'll give you my answer, of course. But the first thing that I'd like to tell us about yourself. Tell us about yourself. And here's who you are and why you love comic books. How'd you get into comic books?
Well, my name is Super Dave. I live here in Portland, Oregon. I love Portland.
Mm-hmm.
It's my town. I love the Northwest. I grew up in a few different cities. I got into comic books because pretty much the black and white TV shows.
Yeah.
My dad was 75 years old when he passed.
Mm.
So that means he was a lot older growing up. So it wasn't, watching all the new stuff on TV growing up.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, okay, we're going to watch something moral. We're going to watch something this. So it was like the Lone Ranger.
Oh, yeah.
It was Batman, Robin, black and white edition.
Mm-hmm.
Before, the color.
Are you about the old white?
I'm talking about the old school.
Right.
And then Superman,
Mm-hmm. George Reeves.
Faster than a speeding bullet, can leap higher than a tower.
Mm-hmm.
That dude, you watch it, and it's one of those things where you lose your train of thought.
Yeah.
Like, can I jump off something like that?
Were you one of those kids that did?
I tried once, but my dad,
Mm-hmm.
when he was alive, my grandma
Mm-hmm.
told the story before when she was alive.
Mm-hmm.
Told the story about my dad standing on the side of the building,
Mm-hmm.
and he was going to jump off, and grandma was sitting on the ground, and he's up on the second story, and he says, "Hey, Mom, look at me, I'm going to fly like Superman." And grandma says, "Hey, wait 1 second, I want to go up there with you." And she did that, and she pulled him down, and what do you think you're doing? I mean, like old school, like probably got swatted on the butt,
Mm-hmm.
a few times, and so that fondness of Superman is pretty big.
Yeah.
And so when I found out about comic books, I'm like, oh, let's read these. You have these Archie comic books that my parents You know, it's like, oh, read this comic book. You know, this is your, you know, dad's comic book when he was a kid.
Mhm.
Okay, but when I got into Superman,
Yeah.
that was where like
That was the hook.
This is pretty cool. And then, you know, if I had a favorite Marvel character, and I was telling my buddy Andy about this a couple days ago, who's your favorite Marvel character and why? And they have to be like a mutant power or a superpower. It can't be no, I don't have powers and stuff. And he's like, oh, okay. And I said it would be the Incredible Hulk.
Mm.
You know, because here's this dude that if he doesn't control his temper and control himself and keep composed, he was basically, you know, this green monster going, oh, smash, you know, type of scenario. And so when I got a chance to read comic books, it was great. And like I was referring to by my buddy Mike, I remember going to his house. We'd go to the comic book store. He would have comic books, and you know, I didn't have any, so he would let me read some of them. I remember that, and he got the Death of Superman.
Oh yeah, great issue.
I mean, like when it came out back in the '90s. Yes, I look young, but I got some age to me. But you know, I mean, it's like it was one of those things like, oh, so we got movies like Christopher Reeve, and you got, you know, I'm a little upset right now about Superman because Superman character, I guess, isn't going to be doing the next movie.
Yeah, Henry Cavill. They've announced that he's no longer going to be involved, but I have a feeling that that's not entirely true. That's my take on it, but we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see.
But I mean, there goes another Superman.
Yeah.
Another, you know, like, so what are you going to do? Replace him? You're going to replace him with the dude that's on Legends of Tomorrow?
I sure hope not.
And put him back into Superman? Because he's doing a great job on the other guy, but still.
That's not my Superman.
He was not Superman.
Yeah.
You know, but just, that's where I love, you know, I mean, that's why I like superheroes. I mean, you know, sometimes we look for our own superpowers.
Yeah.
You know, what is our superpowers? You know, maybe we can't fly. Maybe we can't look through buildings. You know, maybe we can't, you know, grow into mutant muscles and, you know, hear sounds like nobody can. Or, but you know, when we think about, you know, our superpowers, what is our, like, caring or, you know, or being there for people.
Yeah.
You know, that's what, you know, comic books, I know for me, they were there for me. You know, like when I was going through crap, I could dive into my imagination.
Yep, absolutely.
And open up a comic book. I'm like, okay, here we go. Batman's gonna get the bad guys. You know, I mean, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. So obviously, Superman is your favorite character.
Yes.
So what is it about Superman that you love so much?
He cares.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you look at this guy. He comes from a different planet Krypton. He hits the wall. You know, he's there. You know, either people are gonna love him or people are gonna hate him. But in the end of the day, he just still cares.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's an amazing character. He's an amazing character. Superman has always been the one that, as far as I'm concerned, has the most heart, and you know, those qualities that a lot of us aspire to. And so that's a great character. So so for myself, my name is Bullseye Bob. I'm also live in Portland, Oregon. I grew up in California, and I'm also a local pastor here at Ookla Church, and so is Super Dave, and so we do have that perspective. But yeah, you know, I got into comic books at a very early age, probably around 8. No, I'd say it was more like 12. I was 12. It was just about the time my mom had died, and I had picked up a few and started dabbling. But what really hooked me was probably when I was 13, I picked up one where it was Avengers number 58. And I was going through a very hard time in my life. I told you earlier that it kind of gave me a place of belonging, comic books did. Well, like I said, my mom had died. My family had kind of moved away, so I didn't have much contact with them. I didn't have very many friends. and I was just trying to find my way, just trying to gain that sense of belonging or being included, and so I used to go to the Boys and Girls Club, local Boys and Girls Club. There was a guy there who was a counselor. He was I was 13. He was about 22, but he was somebody that I could always talk to, and confide in, and so we had a pretty good friendship. And he's kind of a person I had kind of latched onto and had a relationship grow with him. And so I picked up this one comic book, this Avengers number 58. I don't even think it was 58 at the time, because it was a reprint. I didn't know what reprints were at the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was the story of when the Avengers fought against Ultron, and Vision was created. And of course, we saw that in the Age of Ultron, the movies, the Avengers movie. But this was the comic book that was written by Roy Thomas. And the amazing thing was, this Vision helps the Avengers defeat Ultron, and now Ultron is kind of like this android who also it comes from a human soul, and it's kind of melded, and so he's got this soul to him, but he's also machine, and he doesn't have a family, doesn't have a group, and he's kind of now alone. And after they defeat Ultron, they accept him into the group, into the Avengers. And there's this scene at the very end of the comic book where Vision turns away and he's got his head bowed, and Hawkeye says, what's wrong with him? And I forget which character it is, but they said, well, don't you know that even an android can cry? And then they show this picture of the Vision with this tear falling. And I remember being so touched in that moment, because I knew the longing of his heart was just to belong, just to be accepted. And it touched me, because I knew what that was. And so here's this comic book that was, touching me on a deep level that I never thought possible. And so the only person that I really had to talk about this was this guy, Craig, from the Boys and Girls Club. And I called him up on the phone. And so I started, kind of talking about my day, and that I wanted to kind of, divulge to him that this comic book had touched me. It's kind of embarrassing, because back then, so you read comic books, people get made fun of. I used to see people get beat. I mean, it was kind of rough back then, because it wasn't considered a tough guy thing. But everybody was trying to be tough, and so it wasn't really as widely acceptable as it is now. And so what ends up happening is I'm talking to him, and I'm telling him this comic book touched me. He says, well, tell me about it. And I kind of tell him the story, and he's listening patiently as I'm telling him. And then I'm reading to him the last 2 pages. And when I get to the part where it says, don't you know, even an android can cry, him on the other line repeated it back to me at the exact same time that I was saying it. And I was shocked. And I'm like, you got this comic book? And he's like, yeah, I've got it. And I said, and you know it by heart like that? I mean, he's all, no. Yeah. He says, that comic book, because this was probably at about 1978 or so. And he said, no, I had that comic book when I was a kid, and it was one of my favorite. And I'm like, what do you mean when you were a kid? He says, what you have in your hand is a reprint. He says, but that original comic book I had 10 years ago, and it was one of my favorites. And all of a sudden, the world was opened up to me that other people loved the genre, and he loved that story so much that he had it memorized in his head still. And in the moment, I had this sense of now belonging.
Come on.
And and I was hooked. I was hooked from there. I couldn't get enough of comics. We must have talked like 4 or 5 hours about comic books from that point on, and I have been a fan ever since. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And so, of course, my favorite comic book character, and you'll be able to see him right here, is good old Daredevil. Daredevil is my favorite comic book character. He wasn't the first comic book character that I was into. I think the very first one that I got into was Thor. I loved the God of Thunder. But probably right around 1979, 80, when the X-Men and Teen Titans were like the 2 biggest comic books out there, that's when Frank Miller started writing Daredevil, and it was so visceral and so street level, but at the same time you got to really get into the soul of who Matt Murdock was, and I just fell in love with the character. and I've been a huge Daredevil fan ever since.
Yeah, I mean he's impacted so many different people. Like just that character alone has impacted probably as much or more than Superman.
He's definitely
because he reaches a whole different genre of people.
For sure. Have you been watching the Netflix series?
Yes, I have. I finished it. It was awesome. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but you got to watch it. I think I'll probably go on strike for Netflix if they cancel another series.
Another Netflix Marvel series.
I was hooked to the very end of the Iron Fist, the second season.
Yeah.
And when they decided to cancel it, I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Now, where do we finish the story at? I mean, so, and then you have Luke Cage. There was that ending for this, I believe it was the third season, right?
Yep. Second season.
Second season, yeah. It's like they did it in twos. I didn't really like the ending that much.
Where kind of looks like he's the kingpin of Harlem now.
Yeah. I mean, but still, it's like, that's what's fueling your Netflix.
Yeah.
You look at your subscribers, and look at the different shows they watch and pull it really, know. They put the shows up there everybody are watching, and the Marvel shows, those are what people are watching.
Yeah. People
that don't have cable antennas, they're watching the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They're watching the Gotham series. They're watching the Flash series. They're watching The Gifted. They watch the Legends of Tomorrow, even though it's Supergirl, it was good to start with. Now, it seems like it's floundering a little bit.
Yeah, I hear that. Well, definitely some of the best TV that I've watched in the last 10 years has been those Daredevil shows, not just because I'm a fan, but they're just so incredibly well done.
There was no boundaries.
No boundaries at all.
It was like, okay, let's do it. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go on to strike Netflix because he said the bad word.
Right.
It was like, that's just, I can't tell you the story. I'll tell you. We'll get messages on our YouTube channel saying, dude, I have not watched it, and you told me about that one part. Spoiled the whole movie, the whole show for me.
Right. So I think just as a matter of fact, from now on, right, is if something has been out for at least a month.
Yeah.
At least a month. In other words, you'll have time, listeners, to be able to go watch these things. If you haven't watched it yet after a month, we'll just say spoilers, as Kevin Smith would do.
Spoiler alert!
Spoiler alert. And that will be your cue to turn the show off, and then fast forward, and we'll maybe let you know inside of the podcast where it's going to be, where you can pick back up on it. But we'll let you know when we're going to do spoilers.
Yeah. Because there's a lot we got to talk about.
Absolutely.
Especially in Daredevil. There was some
we could do, at least I could do a whole show just on Daredevil. I could.
You could.
And so maybe we'll do that. We'll do a review. I know we'll be doing special issues of reviews of things going forward.
Yeah.
We'll have interviews as well. We're planning on having different people. Maybe we'll do some podcasts from the Comic-Cons themselves. But I'm really looking forward to what we're going to be having on the Fortress of Popitude with you, my friend.
Hey, so what's coming up in January 5th and 6th?
Well, we have the Hero and Villains Fan Fest, which both Super Dave and Bullseye Bob will be at. What are you looking forward to, Super Dave?
The Walking Dead guys.
The Walking Dead guys.
Yes, because it's say the Gotham guys. Because I think we're going. What day we're going?
We're going on Saturday the 6th.
Yeah, so I'll be looking on their website. I mean, oh my gosh, the newest season of Gotham will be coming out here in a couple weeks, or I think
That's right.
this week. And I was reading in the news article about it that the comic creators, I think this is the last and final season of it.
It is.
Are going traditional. I mean, like the traditional looking Penguin costume, the traditional looking Riddler costume. I mean, they're pulling out some of their roots.
Can I make a prediction?
Yeah.
So up until this, Gotham has been hit or miss. And with the direction they're going with this last season, even though they're saying it's their final season, I think there'll be, if they do what they say they're going to do, I think that there's going to be enough of a push to get a 6th season because people are going to want to see that.
Yeah, and it's also, I don't remember if it was the Flash or the Arrow.
Mhm.
They mentioned Gotham City in one of their episodes just recently.
Oh yeah, they did. It was in the Flash. They mentioned Gotham City.
Talking about Gotham City.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't be surprised what they do is like what they did with Supergirl and the Flash and did a crossover.
Oh yeah.
Because all owned by the same, I believe the same.
The Berlanti-verse,
the
Arrowverse. That's what they're calling it.
So I would be very surprised that we get an older looking Batman, and then them doing a revamp of Superman.
Right.
Which Smallville was good. It had its parts on her. I know Andy's watching this right now, and if I say anything,
What's up, Andy?
Anything negative about Smallville, he's gonna give me a lecture. It was the greatest TV show ever. It was great for like a Dawson Creek's,
Right. It was good for its time.
For its time in the late 2000s and late 99, early 2000s. It was great for its time.
Yeah.
But we don't get the Flash like we have the Flash today.
Right.
We don't get the Flash like we had the Flash on the movies.
No, not at all.
I mean, so there's like I said, tell my wife all the time because she asks the question, well, why is that Flash different over there, and that Flash is different over there, and that Batman's different over there, and Marvel Universe and stuff like that. What are you talking about? I love my wife. She loves crafts. That's all I gotta say.
There you
go. But you talk about the different universes and stuff like that. Coming together. This could be the revival for DC needs on television.
Absolutely.
That could push the bad movie rights that are going out there and not the greatest as catch up with Marvel maybe a little bit.
Right. Right.
You look at Aquaman coming out in December.
Yeah, late December, but right around Christmas. I don't know the exact date, but I'm excited for that one.
But that movie right there could be potentially a great movie. The lead actor in that, what's his name?
Jason Momoa.
He's a phenomenal, my man. He's a phenomenal actor.
He's great.
And if that could be pushed just right, I mean, he turned down Marvel movies.
Yeah.
When he got offered to do a Marvel, because he looks like a superhero.
Yeah.
But if that movie that movie gets pushed, I'm just afraid it's going to happen like they did with the Green Lantern.
Right.
Where they tried to be futuristic and run of the earth, and I'm hoping it's not that. I'm hoping it's more like a Wonder Woman.
Yeah, they did a lot of bad things in that Green Lantern movie. But news came out in the last couple of days. Aquaman has broke every record for pre-sales that is out there. That means they broke the record of Infinity War for pre-sales, which is pretty incredible.
That's incredible too. But there's always that. But
well, of course,
so I'm hoping. I mean, I'm really looking forward to that.
We all have reservations when it comes to Warner Brothers movies, but
yeah. I'm also like comic books, and maybe be quiet if you want, like the Walking Dead comic books and stuff like that.
I don't know with that.
This season, I think by far, is one of the best.
This season?
Yeah, I think.
See, I haven't had a chance to watch them all yet. Because as soon as they announced that Rick was only going to be in it for six episodes, I've been kind of taking my time because I don't want to get to that place where Rick's not on there anymore.
Well, here's the thing. I fell asleep. Towards the end of it, sitting on the couch because me and my wife, that's something me and my wife do now, is watch Walking Dead.
Yep, my wife and his eye as well.
I think I watched it this week before her, but I'm going to have to watch it again. But I missed, even falling asleep for 5 minutes. I missed so much.
Yeah.
Because I saw him do what he did to die. But the reason he did it was a sacrifice.
Right.
But when it jumps up to a different time.
Potential spoilers, everybody.
Potential spoiler. If you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. But I'm going to talk about it because it was oh my word. Yeah. You think about after one man sacrificed, how all these different things take place.
Yeah.
I can start preaching.
Come on, I start to preach,
I
brother.
might get a message and stuff. The youth pastor might come out on me. But it's one of those things where it's just you dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's something about you have comic books and stuff like that. But now that people are taking those amazing stories and taking their hand and swiping it to the movies.
Come on.
And they're finding great actors to go with it.
Absolutely.
I mean, here's my movie pass.
Come on.
I know.
Here's all my money. Take it.
I know. I said movie pass, and that could be some bad words.
Hey,
among people.
whatever works for you.
But I mean, it's you get to sit and relax and enjoy something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like sitting back and watching a comic. Like whoa. I mean, like Andy, my buddy Andy, he reads every Walking Dead graphic novel.
That's awesome.
The book. He has every book. And let me tell you, he'll tell you that sometimes, and this is where we get back to the comic book part of stuff. You can watch a movie and it can be really good, but sometimes not every movie or TV show follows what actually happens in the comic book.
Very rarely.
So, if you really want to know the story about Superman, if you really want to know the story about Daredevil, if you really want to know the story, crack out a comic book.
Absolutely.
I mean, support your local comic book store. There's a reason that Big Bang Theory has Howard and Leonard and Sheldon and them guys going to a comic book store and reading comic books and looking at action figures. We can't lose the fact that comic books go away.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I haven't signed up for the digital copy of DC,
the DC universe
yet. Really, because I want to read it paperback.
Good.
Good. That's what we're about. I mean, we're not like, hey, let's go to this website on our thing. We like comic books. We genuinely like comic books and graphic novels, and there's something about that purist thing.
Sure, there's nothing like holding an actual book in your hand. I mean, so digital's fine. And you can definitely buy your comics digitally, but there's something about holding that comic book in your hand.
Walking into the store, getting a comic book, saying, what's up?
Absolutely. Which we're about to do here shortly.
We are. We're going to go to
the Comics Adventure. We're going to go visit Bruce.
Yep, in Gladstone, Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is one of the things that I really hope that, comes out of this show. If you're not reading comics at this particular time, I hope that this show encourages you or gives you some drive to go down to your local comic store and pick up a book. All these movies and TV shows are great, Super Dave, but all of the ideas for these shows came from a comic book.
That's right.
And if we don't support that medium, then that goes away. And so I'm always a very strong supporter of definitely supporting that medium. And keeping it going, because if we don't support it, then it won't be there anymore. Yeah. And so I think that right there is pretty much. Did you have anything else that you wanted to say, Super Dave?
No, that's about it. I just intro this video from my buddy Mike Surber.
Thank you very much, Mike.
I asked him on Instagram last night, hey, can we use your tribute video for Stanley in our very first episode? And he said, absolutely. And
come on.
So if you're on YouTube and you want to, learn more about it, it's Mr. Henshaw is the name of the album. Look up Mike Surber on YouTube, and you can support him on Patreon, which will eventually be on Patreon too.
Absolutely.
So this is our first episode. Next time you'll see all our channel information on the bottom of the screen.
Sure thing.
But we want to say thank you for listening to episode 1.
Issue 1. Yes.
The Fortress of Solitude.
Fortress of Popitude.
Fortress of Popitude.
There we go. It'll take a couple times.
Hey, if you look in this office right now, in this man cave, you got Mick Foley right there. 20 years falling off this thing. You got signed Action Comics right there.
Number 1000 by Brian Michael Bendis.
Signed Man of Steel. So when I say Fortress of Solitude, you gotta say, oh, he means Fortress of Popitude.
That's right. So, listeners, thank you very much. Of course, you can find us on YouTube. We'll have all the channel information, like Super Dave said, the next time. Make sure you hit subscribe. You'll be able to find our podcast as well. And hey, send us a note. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want to hear. We'd love to hear from you. We know that there are people out there that love this just as much as we do, and we want to hear from you. And so that is your first issue of Fortress of Popitude, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Excelsior!
Booyah!
The ink never dries on the stories he writes, but the heroes and villains all just froze.
'Cause there's nothing to fight for and nothing to write for on the day that Stanley went home to Joan. He used to write funnies just for the money. Said he'd rather be changing the world. So he took one more stab at a fantastic rag, thanks to a nudge from his girl. He served in the army and fought in the war, brought back stories of courage galore that he took to the bullpen alongside more good men like Kirby and Ditko and countless more. These creations began to step out of the page through silver and bronze in this modern age, making children believe that good will prevail and reminding the grown-ups we were built on these tales. They called him the man for a reason, you know. His soapbox was more than just stories and jokes. The message is clear, there's no reason to fear, 'cause evil is outnumbered by marvelous folks. The ink never dries on the stories he writes, but the heroes and villains all just froze. 'Cause there's nothing to fight for and nothing to write for on the day that Stanley went home to Joan. Excelsior.
Stop talking about comic books or I'll kill you.